All right, the crisis at our southern border is growing more serious every day. In Arizona, over 650 illegal immigrants crossing the border were just detained in just the last 48 hours. And according to our own William LaJeunesse, a dozen members of the Caravan were arrested Wednesday night near San Diego for crossing the border illegally. Remember, only the first few hundred migrants have arrived. We're expecting a couple of thousand in just the next few days, and then many more after that. Let me be clear. I have said I really believe the vast majority of people in this caravan are probably people that are poor. They have good intentions. They're looking for a life for themselves, their family, a good job, a better future. And there is, for us, a massive security risk. Now, criminals also will take advantage of unchecked, unvetted migration into our country. We see it every day. Look at what happened in Arkansas on Sunday. A 29-year-old illegal immigrant opening fire on officers during a traffic stop outside of Fayetteville. We have the dash cam footage, but be warned, this video is disturbing.
Shots fired, kid! Kenny, I need units now.
This is why we talk about vetting people before they come into the country. Thankfully, no officers were injured. The perpetrator was taken into custody. But this act of violence is unacceptable, and the very reason secure borders, a strong system of vetting are vitally important. When I sat through a security briefing in Texas with Rick Perry, 642,000 crimes they had documented in a 7-year period of time. Some not serious, but some very serious, going up to murder. That's in one state. And while most Americans support common sense border security measures, far-left Democrats are continuing to demonize those who are just trying to protect us and enforce our laws. Take, for example, California Senator Kamala Harris, who just today literally compared ICE to the KKK in the sense that, well, don't you think that there's a perception problem that ICE seems like the KKK? Well, speaking with the nominee to lead that agency, watch this.
The Klan was what we would call today a domestic terrorist group.
Why? Why would we call them domestic terrorist group?
Because they tried to use fear and force to change political environment.
And what was the motivation for the use of fear and force?
It was based on race and ethnicity.
Right. Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels between
I'm talking about perception.
Officers and agents.
I'm talking about perception.
I do not see a parallel between what is constitutionally mandated as it relates to enforcing the law.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no.
Are you aware that there's a perception
that puts ICE in the same category as the KKK? Is that what you're asking me?
That senator wants to be your next president. Now, what you just saw is beyond despicable. Now, to be that patronizing, frankly, idiotic, utterly disrespectful to men and women in law enforcement that put their lives on the line for us every single solitary day is shameful. How many border agents have been injured or killed performing their daily work? It's exactly what I've been warning you about. This is the most radical crop of Democrats to ever come to Washington. Instead of respecting our laws, our sovereignty, our Constitution, they push for open borders, sanctuary cities and states, and without a doubt, they're saying they want to abolish ICE, the very organization responsible for enforcing our system of immigration laws. They don't care how much it costs, what danger it poses to you, the American people. They want wide open borders. And tonight, Kamala Harris might have one less challenger in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. Yesterday, fame-seeking anti-Trump attorney Michael Avenatti, he was arrested on charges of felony domestic violence. Now, these are very serious charges. But unlike him and many others that were so willing to rush to judgment and never afforded Justice Kavanaugh due process, the presumption of innocence, we on this show are consistent. Every American deserves due process. Every American deserves that presumption of innocence. Yes, even if you don't agree with them politically, someone like Michael Avenatti, he deserves it, you deserve it, everybody deserves it, and guess what? Judge Kavanaugh deserved it and didn't get it. Now, the rush to judgment, this is a dangerous thing in this country. Remember Richard Jewell, falsely accused of being the lone bomber in the Olympic Park bombing in '96. He fit the profile of the lone bomber because he lived with his mother. I didn't know at the time. He was listening to my radio show, and I was saying, that makes no sense. It turned out he was a hero. He wasn't the bomber. I found out later, he told me I was the only one. He was listening to the show that stood up for him and at least gave him a fair shot, the presumption of innocence. By the way, you might remember the Duke lacrosse team. They were falsely smeared. On our show, we didn't rush to judgment, and I took the time to go and meet with some of the kids and their families to do some investigative work. And let's not forget what the left did in Ferguson. Police officer Darren Wilson was never charged in that case. His career was ruined anyway. Remember what happened in Baltimore? Everyone rushed to judgment. All those officers were guilty of what happened with Freddie Gray. None of them convicted. How many times did the president at the time, Obama, rush to judgment? The Cambridge police acting stupidly. During every big moment, so many people on the left, if it fits their political agenda, if it's politically expedient, if they can get cheap political points, they rush to judgment just for political gain. No presumption of innocence ever with these people when it comes to politics. So, yes, Michael Avenatti deserves due process. He deserves the presumption of innocence, even though it wasn't that long ago. He did not extend that basic decency to Justice Kavanaugh. Frankly, just the opposite. Remember, it was he that pushed a phony claim from a client named Julie Swetnick. Remember, they came out with that affidavit. And at the time, by the way, Alan Dershowitz said he might have to rescind this because the story started to change. And she was alleging that when Brett Kavanaugh was in high school, he participated in numerous parties, gang rape parties, where girls' drinks were systematically drugged, boys lining up in the hallways, waiting their turn to gang rape their teenage victims. And she claimed it happened many times. These claims were given to the Senate Judiciary Committee in a sworn statement. None of those claims, none of them were ever corroborated. No evidence was ever presented. Swetnick later backtracked during an interview with NBC. Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley recently referred Avenatti and Swetnick now to the Department of Justice for a criminal probe into their false statements. It is clear that Avenatti, he wanted to derail Judge Kavanaugh's life over these absurd claims. He should have gotten his full story. And how does his own client contradict what he said in an affidavit? He didn't give a rip about due process, presumption of innocence. And now this issue has come full circle for him. Take a look.
I have never struck a woman. I never will strike a woman.
I've never sexually assaulted anyone. Not in high school, not in college, not ever.
I am looking forward to a full investigation, at which point I am confident that I will be fully exonerated.
I know that any kind of investigation, Senate, FBI, Montgomery County Police, whatever, will clear me.
Now, in this country, these protections, due process, should never, ever, ever be a partisan political issue. It's not Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. It must be applied to every American equally. Sadly, Avenatti wasn't the only person on the left with no forethought, no principles. And just a short time ago, so many Democrats, so many in the mainstream media, they were willing to throw out fundamental, basic rights right out the window because of an unyielding partisan hatred for Judge Kavanaugh. Remember this.
This is a monumental, defining moment this week when you have someone like Cosby going to prison and then in the same breath having Kavanaugh possibly going to the highest court in the land.
I am blown away. Before I saw this stuff, I'm like, oh, come on, what could be in this guy's yearbook? Like, little nonsense. This is sick stuff.
Right.
The Devil's Triangle in your yearbook forever and ever.
These people in Congress right now in that Senate Judiciary Committee, these white men, old, but
by the way, are not protecting women. They're protecting a man who is probably guilty.
Not only do women like Dr. Ford, who bravely comes forward, need to be heard, but they need to be believed. They need to be believed. I just want to say to the men of this country, just shut up and step up. Do the right thing.
Let me just say right at the outset, I believe Dr. Ford. I believe the survivor here.
I believe her. I stand with her. And
do you hope she shows up on Monday? Do you hope that she testifies?
I don't think she should be bullied into this scenario where it's a he said, she said. It's a sham hearing. And I don't think she should participate in it.
It's definitely attempted rape. I don't see it any other way.
Remember, the charges against Judge Kavanaugh were from 36 years ago. Where is the outrage? Those people you just watched over somebody they politically agree with, Michael Avenatti, are they so willing to suspend these fundamental rights when it comes to claims made against him? Why? Because he's a Democrat? Or his name is not Keith Ellison? Another example? There are not charges from 36 years ago. By July of this year, when he was spewing nonstop anti-Trump vitriol, well, guess what? Michael Avenatti appeared on cable news over 200 times. According to analysis from the Washington Free Beacon, fake news CNN, conspiracy TV MSNBC gave Avenatti $175 million worth of free media coverage. Why did he become the star guest? Because he was trashing Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. Now what do we hear about him? Crickets. Now, Newsbusters reports tonight that CNN barely covered the Avenatti arrest. MSNBC also tried to ignore and play down the story. That is in stark contrast to their wall-to-wall coverage of the Swetnick allegations, with no evidence of regular gang rapes and drugging of teenage girls when Kavanaugh was in high school. All right, important issue. This is about the rule of law, equal application of the law. Let's not politicize political differences or criminalize differences like this. This is now becoming madness. Now let's turn to the latest out of Mueller's partisan witch hunt. Earlier today, President Trump, he was sounding off, reminding we, the people, the American people, that there's been no finding of collusion. He also highlighted how much money and time this endless investigation is costing you, the American taxpayer. And the president went on to tweet, quote, universities will someday study what highly conflicted and not Senate-approved Bob Mueller and his gang of Democratic thugs have done to destroy people. Why is he protecting crooked Hillary, Comey, McCabe, Page, and her lover, Peter Strzok, and all of his friends on the other side? They have spent months digging into everything and anyone and everyone associated with President Trump while ignoring what we now know to be factual and true. That is collusion, real crimes committed by Hillary Clinton, violating the Espionage Act. Fact, the biggest, easiest slam dunk case as it relates to, obstruction of justice we've ever seen. Why has there been no Mueller investigation into Hillary's bought and paid for dirty Russian dossier, put together by a foreign spy, Russian intelligence sources, paid for by Hillary and the DNC that she was controlling? Why? In order to, in part, influence an election. You, the American people, how is that not Russian collusion? What about the dissemination of the Russian intelligence throughout the highest levels of your government? Those Russian lies spread out to the American people before the 2016 election to propagandize and influence people before they voted in that election and use then to destroy President Trump after the election. What about the fraud on a FISA court 4 times? Grassley, Graham, Nunes memos, the bulk of information in those FISA warrants used the same unverified, uncorroborated dossier that Steele, under oath himself, testified he had no idea if was true. This is all being ignored. Why? Because this partisan witch hunt has never really been about Russia collusion. It has been about delegitimize President Trump, started by a guy that says, he should lose 100 million to 0 in the election. The guy that exonerated Hillary and was writing an exoneration before investigation. Show me the man, I'll find you the crime. And finally tonight, we do turn to good and bad news out of Florida. First, the good news. There will be no more recounts in the gubernatorial election. Barring any last-minute legal attempts to maybe steal the election, Have to always assume that's a possibility. Republican Ron DeSantis is now certified. He will be the next governor of the great state of Florida. Gillum, of course, has not conceded, even though he only picked up, get this, 1 vote in the recount. 1 vote. And my sources tell me tonight that, in fact, Rick Scott has picked up a lot of votes in the recount. In the Senate race, the chaos continues. After a machine recount, well, Rick Scott remains way ahead, having picked up, in fact, some votes. Palm Beach County, once again, failed to meet the statutory deadline, so the original results in that county stand. But a hand count of thousands of contested or faulty ballots, those with over votes, that means that if at the top of the ticket, you're supposed to fill in the oval and there's a dot down there, you can bet that Nelson's attorney will say, you see that dot at the bottom? They meant to put it up here. That's going to be going on. The madness continues. Democratic attorneys are now pulling out all the stops to try and make up ground, which will be impossible. Following a suit, a Florida judge ruled earlier that throwing out ballots with mismatched signatures was unconstitutional. Now, this is what this means. Any liberal judge can change the law. That means ballots can change up to 11 days after the election. That is insane. In other words, he changed Florida state law from the bench, also extending the deadline for so-called curing contested ballots to Saturday, bringing about 4,000 votes into play, which means the 13,000-plus vote lead that, in fact, Rick Scott has will stand. By the way, the same judge, Fox News has learned today, whose wife, Karen Walker, donated, to Senator Bill Nelson. Shouldn't he have recused himself? All right, we're going to continue to track the results out of Florida, as November 20th is now the deadline to certify the election results. But you can anticipate, I'm sure, more and more and more court challenges.